As far as film and TV go, few cars are better known than the General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard, a legendary machine that many since the original show's airing have dreamed of owning. In the muscle car community, this is probably the #1 film car. But how does the General Lee stack up against cars that mean the same to other circles? That brings us to the world of toge racing in Japan, where an AE86 Panda Trueno dominated the scene as the poster child of JDM. The only other vehicles I could think of were possibly the Devil Z from One Good Midnight and Brian's Supra from Fast and Furious, but that would be no contest for both, easily destroying the General. As for the Trueno, that would be a much more fair pairing. I've always wanted to pair these two cars together, modify them to the specs they had in the shows and movies, and then race them, mainly because they actually stack up surprisingly evenly, and both being seen commonly drifting. It's just that the disciplines are different. Where the Duke boys get sideways on red Georgia clay, Takumi Fujiwara does the same on windy mountain passes. And so we begin an epic battle. Cowboy versus Samurai. The Confederacy versus Imperial Japan. Muscle versus tuner. Power versus handling. Now let's get started. First, we begin with the Toyota AE86 from the Japanese anime Initial D, which has become a meme in the past few years, but I will add is actually a really good anime. Takumi Fujiwara originally uses it to deliver tofu for his father's shop, and hones his skills driving on his home course of Akina Pass in his teenage years, and actually becomes quite skilled enough to beat the best street racing and even professional circuit racing has to offer. Takumi uses brains and strategy over brawn and sheer power. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to travel back to Forza 6 for this challenge, as Forza ran into licensing issues with Toyota for the 7th game, and the Trueno does not make an appearance, which was quite sad once the game came out. And I wanted to make this as fair as possible, so I'll also run the Charger in Forza 6 as well. The car in the show is a 1983 model, but the game provides a 1985 Trueno, which honestly should be fine, as we'll be increasing the horsepower anyways, as I'll get to soon. I'll also be replicating the Trueno as it was in the final season of Initial D, when it was the very fastest, because the Trueno in the first season probably will not stack up to the Charger in any way. But the final season Trueno should be able to give the Charger at least somewhat a run for its money. Now to begin with the modifications. I'll only be modifying the car based on what is mentioned in the show. The Trueno has an upgraded exhaust, so I gave it a sport exhaust within Forza. The car did have minimal weight reduction in the show, so I gave it the first level. A roll cage was fitted, tuned suspension, which means I just lowered it. I fitted lighter rims similar to Watanabe's on Takumi's 86, and upgraded brakes in the form of Forza's street level brakes, and finally a carbon fiber hood, which actually is just a cosmetic modification within the game. Anyways, everything else is stock, including the tires, as I couldn't find any evidence of better tires within the show or anything else. The last order of business, and the biggest, was the upgraded engine, which by the final season is an extremely high revving 4AGU Toyota Rally Racing engine. One of Takumi's special moves is actually hiding the car's potential and hiding the fact that the car can rev up to 11,000 RPM and then passing the car utilizing that extra power. And at these high revs, the car can reach a potential horsepower of around 240. Unfortunately, the only way to actually engine swap the car in this game to this option is with a turbo, and the 86 never had a turbo. Instead, I opted to simply give the stock engine a set of small upgrades in every category, similar to Shinji's AE86, which has the standard engine, but is heavily tuned up. And now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure Shinji's AE86 did have a turbo, but either way, it does utilize the stock engine. Oh, and one more thing, an additional cup holder has also been installed. Now, onto the General Lee. Can't say that all Dukes of Hazzard fans know Takumi's 86, but I can probably say with confidence that most true Initial D fans do know of the General Lee, a cultural icon. While the Trueno is a cultural icon in its own right, the General Lee is definitely even more so. It was utilized by Bo and Luke Duke and the Dukes of Hazzard to transport moonshine across rural Georgia, making daring runs from local law enforcement. In the sense that both cars are utilized to make money using speed and doing runs to transport commodities, they're truly similar. The iconic orange paint job, the O1 on the doors, and the rebel flag adorning the roof are very well known, and the car was once a symbol of Southern pride, though I'm sure it still is for some. As for the modifications, they're a little bit unclear with the General Lee, and some of these are mentioned from the show, and others are just what the actual stunt cars were given. As a lot of information I can't really find. It was a lot harder to find than what was mentioned in the anime in Initial D. Now to start off, we have a roll cage. We have loosened brakes, which means I just kept the stock brakes, Racing tires, significant weight reduction primarily to perform the Generali's incredible jumps without nosediving into the concrete. The Dixie horn, check, and check. And custom rims, which unfortunately do not exist in Forza in the same way they were in the show, so I chose the next best thing. Additionally, the real Generali typically had a 383 or more commonly for the show cars a 440 Magnum V8. That made around 390 horsepower or so. Unfortunately, Forza only has the 426 Hemi available for the 69 Charger, and this has 425 horsepower, so I had to use this. As a result of this huge engine, I slightly reduced the weight reduction to a lower level within Forza's upgrade shop to make it fair for the Trueno. While the Hemi is not concurrent with what is canon, a 426 Hemi was dropped into the Generali in the Dukes of Hazzard 2005 reboot movie, so at least you can say in one way or another a Generali has been confirmed to have one. As for specs, Takami's 86 has 240 horsepower, 189 pound-feet of torque, and a very light weight of 1,818 pounds. A 1.6-liter naturally aspirated straight 4 engine, a 5-speed manual, and its rear-wheel drive. The Generali, on the other hand, has 425 horsepower, a whopping 490 pound-feet of torque, a heavy 3,733 pound weight, but that's still much lighter than stock, and a huge 7.0-liter naturally aspirated Hemi V8. And additionally, it has a 4-speed manual and its rear-wheel drive. So it appears the Trueno is significantly lacking in power figures, over a third less, but wins out with the weight being half that of the Charger, even with weight reduction. Additionally, the Charger does not have brake upgrades, but the Trueno does. But the Trueno does not have upgraded tires, while the Charger does. So it really evens out at the end of the day. Additionally, the Trueno is a newer car, so you can expect a slightly more intelligent delivery of power, along with a more advanced transmission. Other than that, I'd say they're quite balanced. Even the in-game car rating are only about 10 or 20 apart, and both are C-Class vehicles. So, now let's get on to the challenge. We'll be racing at Laguna Seca today, with the same rules and parameters as the GTO challenge from my last video. I'll run a minimum of 5 runs, and choose the best time of those 5, or I keep running laps until I can't improve the time any longer. Then after the track runs, we'll do a drag racing session, first on a quarter mile, then a half mile. And for those who are interested, I'm driving manual without clutch, no traction or stability, and no assist apart from suggested racing line to make this as fair of a competition as possible. Additionally, I am utilizing a controller and no racing wheel. Now, we'll be starting with the AE86 on this one. Let's get into it. Now the Trueno, to start off, was incredibly easy to drive, with torque and horsepower as low as it is. It was so stable it was almost a wonder the car was iconically utilized for drifting. Of course, in the show, Takami does say that grip racing is far superior, saying that drifting is a showy, flashy way of shaving off speed. This car is a poster child for this philosophy, easy floating around the racetrack as if it's a slot car on rails. You can definitely get sideways with it, but I forgot what button I had set for the handbrake in Forza 6, so I didn't even bother doing it during my runs. Though I do get sideways a few times, but not in drift. It's very easy to make turns in this car, especially this turn, which is usually very hard to complete perfectly. But nonetheless, I got the perfect rating multiple times right here. With the upgraded brakes, as you can see, we can go along with Takami's preferred racing style of using the least amount of brakes possible, which is essentially the philosophy behind his drifting, using the momentum to carry the car around the corner, which is not necessarily drifting, it's just using a different method to slow down the car other than brakes. Really, the Trueno just shot around the corners like a rocket. Now that I've gone over how this car behaves, we can get on to my times, and my final and best run with this car. So here are the Trueno's times. So I ran 5 laps, but the 4th was the best, and as such, I was not satisfied with the final run being inferior. So I ran it as many times as it took to beat it. The 4th run was 1:47.725. As you can see, I've labeled it as the amazing lap. And I tried so hard to beat it, I was almost in a frenzy. So let's take a look at my final run, shall we? So this run, I tried to radically reduce the braking time, almost to the limit. I actually do not make the best turns here, especially the first and second ones, so after that I knew I'd have to pull some serious stuff to make up the lost time. I follow a very clean line through there. Shoot into this turn. Brake at the second cycle here and into the S turn. And this is one of the few times I got that gradual turn perfectly. The car just floats into it. I like the fact that how I made that turn was the equalizer in making this a good lap, since I'm traveling at such a high speed through it. And boom, now I zoom to the finish line. And as you can see, it is 1:47.572, which is faster by a very small margin. Either way, I couldn't believe that half crappy lap just beat my best time, but it did. Either way, that means that my lap times could be even faster, but that's beside the point because I was satisfied. So now the Trueno rests at first place on the leaderboard of one car. Congratulations, Trueno. Now onto the General League. To start off, this car just feels faster, owing mostly to the sound, which is a mean virtual Hemi roar.
Just a good old boy, never meaning no harm. They told me never saw.
Now as for the handling, I expected it to be a lot like the Pontiac GTO from my last car comparison. Hard to control, slidey, and extremely sloppy, and a bunch of wasted horsepower. And while it did have this element to it compared to the Trueno, it was much more tame than I expected, owing surely to the weight reduction and racing tires helping the car stay nice and firm on the racetrack. Now let's take a look at the General League's track times. Right off the bat, this car had a promising future, with the warm-up lap being 1 full second ahead of the Trueno. But then, laps started rolling in, and the farther I went, the less sure I was that this car could even break the 1-minute 50-second barrier. But I was determined to do it, and so here's my final run. Let's see if this honky-tonkin' machine can beat a piece of crap Corolla. So, we begin our run through the first turn. Beautifully done, might I add. Getting a little sideways here.
Passing everything in sight. I'm the best pal the Duke boys ever had. I'm thunder on the highway looking bad, bad, bad.
This car does have tremendous straight line speed, or the engine sound just makes it seem like it. I can't really tell.
I'm a fighter and a charmer.
Swiggity swoogity, making this turn smoothly.
My friends all know me as a General Lee. I'm the General Lee of piston puppets.
In the dirt here, the General Lee is certainly good at doing that. Now in this particular lap, I played it a little safer with braking at the S turn because the Charger's lack of brakes was very unpredictable and resulted in me flying in the sand a few times. Very different from the Trueno.
Take a look back there. Sirens blowing, red lights flashing everywhere. We'll cross the field and we'll be running free.
Pump the brakes and gas through there.
They elite us with compliments of me, the General Lee.
Perfect turns all around.
I'm a hero, and that's how I'll make you feel when you're
And now back to the line.
with me. And the law is at your heels. I'm glory bound, but when the chase is done, I'll take off through the mountains and have...
And there you have it. I broke the 150 barrier with 1:49.556. As you can see, I did try to beat it with the 7th lap, but when I didn't, I just gave up. And the reason being that the Charger times were so consistent that I didn't see much improvement in them, or my driving for that matter. While the Trueno, still beating the Charger flat out, certainly had room for improvement. I knew I could have gotten a better time with the Trueno, maybe even a minute 46, but the Charger I had little faith in by that 7th run. So I'm sorry, Dukes fans and muscle car fans. At least on the road course, the General Lee loses out, though it put up a valiant effort, which gives the car my utmost respect. But do not fret, as up next is the drag racing challenge. First, on a quarter-mile drag. Also, I have a surprise for you, but before I reveal it and begin this next challenge, I wanted to jump the General Lee, and I know the perfect spot on the test track airfield.
Compliments of me, the General Lee.
And there it is. I can officially say I've jumped the General Lee. Now for the surprise, a truly cursed surprise. Somewhere in some alternate universe, Takumi Fujiwara uses a 1969 Dodge Charger to make tofu runs in southern Georgia. So, now that aside, onto the drag racing. So let's begin with the Charger. And by the way, I'm running only 3/4 mile runs per car.
And all the bells were ringing tonight. They drove old Dixie.
So, as you can see, she ran a decent 13-second quarter mile. So let's see if the Trueno can beat it. Okay, wow, that was over faster than I thought. The Trueno smashed the Charger's speed by over a second. So these are my times, and the Trueno is just far superior, beating the Charger even on the first run. And for your information, I did retry the drag race on a half mile and mile drag, just to see if we could unlock the V8 power of the Hemi, but no luck. The gap was about the same both times, about around a second. It's actually quite surprising that the Charger lost, and I thought it would win in each category, or at least the 1 mile drag with the V8. But the Trueno is so light, and with the upgraded engine, it was no contest at the end of the day. So unfortunately, muscle cars have lost to GDM today. But lose the battle, win the war. Maybe next time on my Forza Challenge battles, we'll see an American muscle car take the W. And speaking of that, I'll be taking suggestions for future Forza car versus challenges. They're a lot of fun to make, and there's many more iconic comparisons to be made. Until then, you have a wonderful day.
Sure.